morning, everybody out there in YouTube. My name is Cameron Perez, and I have here with me again Chief and Cultural Preservation Officer of the Bakawa Koiteke Nation, Gary Perez, also known as Daddy. Good morning, Daddy.
Good morning, Cameron.
So today is the 5th of April. We got 3 days until the big eclipse, and I'm sure Dad has some words about that, but he's wanted to talk about what's going on here recently for the Bakawa Koiteke Nation. So why don't we start there?
Sure.
From my understanding, you had a thing with NASA here recently?
Yep.
What was that about?
Well, they've been courting our research.
Okay.
And they're interested in the math that our ancestors left behind in the rock art. And they got some attention through the lawsuit against the city of San Antonio. And the lawsuit contains astronomy in it.
Yeah.
And our friend Alicia Garlock reached out to them and told them about the lawsuit and the astronomy and so forth to see if NASA would lend a hand with it, but they can't get involved. But they were more interested in what it was, our astronomy was all about. So we've been meeting in Zoom meetings for the last few months, and we've decided that we're going to collaborate. They're going to publish our ancestors' work, mathematics, and then we're going to digitize the rock art.
Oh, okay.
And then we're going to animate the story inside it in the rock art, and then we're going to animate the local creation story in San Antonio. And then we're going to, around all that, we're going to create a curriculum to teach what we learned from our ancestral math and science to the kids. Is primarily what they want to do. They want children to have access to their ancestral work.
So, like, when you say animate, you mean like the little characters on the panel are going to be jumping around?
No, that the digitized part of it's not. We're not going to digitize the entire painting. We're not going to do that. We're going to take some pieces of it and digitize it so it can be used the way it was intended, like as a daily calendar.
Oh, okay. So you'll be able to create like a legend and a key, and you'll be able to interpret that on screen.
Sure, but then you'll be able to type in your birthday, and the phase of the moon will pop up, and anything going on in the skies at the time. So for example, on the day that you were born, was October 8th, 1987. You go back and you click on that, and it'll pop up whatever phase of the moon was in there, and then it'll tell you, what time the sun rose in San Angelo, what time did it set, were there any meteor showers taking place, eclipses, that sort of thing. And but that's for the adults, for the higher learning. You would still have to learn as a child how to navigate the math involved in what you will have access to when you're older. We want the kids to learn it, and we want the kids to inculcate it into their frame of thinking, so that they have license and they take ownership of it as a people, And some of the things we'll publish, and if we use NASA's publishing, what do you call it?
Their publisher.
Some of their publishers. If they use their publishing model, then it becomes part of the public domain. So some of the things we're going to publish, some of the things we're not. We're just going to keep it to ourselves because we just can't tell people.
some things need to stay secret.
Some things need to stay with us so that we maintain our
not anonymity, but
no, we maintain our sovereignty. I don't like that word.
I don't like that word either.
But you get my drift.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I even heard a rumor that there was going to be a children's book. Is that still in the works, or
not from us?
But from NASA?
No, the NASA will. We will turn those. We'll animate the stories, right? And then we'll do children's books, telling the story of the blue panther and the water bird and the deer that guided us through the underworld and towards the first sunrise. And all of that will go into children's books.
Okay, cool.
And those will become part of the public domain.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, what my dad is referencing is the White Shaman panel that's out near Comstock, Texas. Just off the Pecos River in this tribute. It's kind of not really a tributary. It's more like a watershed. All the buttes out there. Well, not buttes. What do you call those flat things? They're what do you call them? God,
mesas.
Yeah, but there's a different word I'm thinking of. Plateaus. All the mesas out there are real flat. It's flat and hilly, but they all have a watershed that the water erodes to a point and then collects into the Pecos River. Along one of those erosion points is a rock shelter that went into the sedimentary rock that's there, the base, and it's how big is this mural? It's
13 feet long. Yeah.
13 feet long
and a few feet wide, tall. Yeah.
So there's this massive pictograph painting, prehistorical book scroll, instrument of knowledge painted on in one of these rock shelters. So just see if you can give a very brief explanation of what that pictograph or what it looks like.
Well, the first thing we learned about it, when I was introduced to it, I couldn't tell you what it meant until the story behind it was explained to me about the evening star traveling through the underworld with the sun, and then becoming the morning star, and then the sun kills the morning star Venus, and then peyote falls from the sky on its antler tines. As the deer is falling from the sky, it brings peyote to the people. And but it doesn't say what happened after that. It doesn't say what happened, who picked up the peyote up for the first time. It doesn't say any of it, or what. And after it was picked up, what happened with it? Nobody. There's no explanation in the painting. It's the last thing that happens in the saga that's taking place, and it doesn't allude to anything whatsoever. But in any case, I had a hunch that it was a map. Some of the patterns in there matched the edge. One of the most important patterns in it matched the edge of the Balcones escarpment. And so we had a dear friend of mine, Andrew May, who was a geographer, superimposed parts of the painting over parts of areas I thought were part of Texas topography. And it matched. Everything matched. And so we published that paper a few years ago, and recently in the Texas Archaeological Society Bulletin. I think it's available online, I'm not sure. And then shortly after we did the geography, we went after the astronomy, and then the math paired with the astronomy. So this painting predicts planetary conjunctions, planetary alignments, meteor showers, eclipses. and it still ticks like the clock, and you can still use it as a daily calendar.
So when you say calendar, you mean like it could be in relation to the Aztec or the Mayan calendar?
Those calendars were for agricultural societies. This one is for hunting and gathering. Hunting and gathering, hunter-gatherers created their own calendar to make them super sufficient hunters. They weren't interested in having a ruling class over other people and subjugating people to create pyramids. We already had a natural temple of the sun, and we had a natural temple of the moon. And so the Texas landscape served as a way to live your life with those beliefs. Imagine if you were blind and you're reading a map of Texas could be read as Braille, and as you run your fingers over the Braille, and you have access to mountains and rivers and streams and such, it reads, the state of Texas reads like a story, telling you a story about what's going on in the landscape. And then equal to that are analogous stars in the sky connected to those places.
Okay, so you're saying that by properly being able to read the panel, you can tell by looking up the stars what season it is, and therefore when it, and then the corresponding location of Texas, which would be the best place to forage, or the best place to hunt, or the best place for this to be blooming, or that to be blooming, or for this fruit to be abundant.
Yeah.
We're like, oh look, this constellation's coming out. We need to start headed that way because this is going to happen soon.
Yeah, I would say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's boots on the ground. You know what I mean? That's not me sitting at a computer. Even though I can do that, but we have a pretty good hunch because of hunter-gatherer societies that still exist all around the world. They still navigate using the stars, and as a hunter-gatherer forages through his country, his brain is making a mental map of the area that he covers from the sky looking down. Hunter-gatherers have that interesting skill that most of us don't have anymore. And so that's why they were able to create a map 2,000 years ago of the landscape of Texas.
It kind of reminds me of a movie I saw once. You ever seen a movie called Alpha?
Mm-hmm.
So Alpha follows. I mean, I'm not 100% sure the writers or the directors knew exactly the story they were telling, because the main story is the first dog about a young boy, Paleolithic era, Europe,
Mm-hmm.
who saves a sick or injured wolf and becomes the first dog. Now, in the very beginning of the film, you see a band of men traveling to a point where they know for a fact that the paleo buffalo, European buffalo, are going to be based on the stars. They look up at the sky and they constantly tell each other, we're running out of time. They're coming. We need to hurry. They're coming. And sure enough, when they get there, like a day or so later, this massive herd of Paleolithic European buffalo reach this point, and they're able to chase them over a cliff. And I was thinking about that. I was like, you know what? I think that's more accurate than they gave it credit for.
Super accurate. Super. We have a place like that here in Texas called Bonfire Shelter.
Bonfire Shelter?
Mm-hmm. Where our ancestors used to chase the bison and tequas, not today's buffalo.
Yeah, the big ones.
Yeah, and chase them over the edge, and they would fall and break their legs, and then they would come in and finish them off, cut the meat, and carry it out with them. It had been used for so long that there was so much fat that had built up over the hundreds or even thousands of years there at Bonfire Shelter, and then one day it just spontaneously combusted.
Oh, you
Very
serious?
hot summer, yeah.
Man, so all that aceite that was soaking into the ground, it just kind of collected, and then all of a sudden it just ignited?
Ignited.
Whoa!
That's why they called it bonfire shelter.
Wow, that's
Pretty cool.
insane.
That's why people who work in industries like the car making industry, you take your rags. You're supposed to pile up your rags, like put your dirty rags in a can, in a big can, but that can has to be emptied before too long because all of the oils and the grease in the rags can spontaneously combust.
You know what? Do you know who Jack London is?
Jack London, yeah.
Okay, so Jack London was the writer of some of the greatest adventure books of all time. Call of the Wild, White Fang. He was a lot of his books featured a common element, and that was wolves. So he built himself a house that he later dubbed the Wolf House in just north of San Francisco in California. The day the house was finished, one of the contractors left his oil rag in the house, and it spontaneously combusted, and the entire house burned to the ground. And he never rebuilt it. His wife died soon after, and later he died, having never rebuilt that house. But it was his dream house. You can still visit it today, the ruins, but it's a related tidbit that I find fascinating. Okay, so why? So tell me this thing, because I don't understand. I haven't been able to find. Otherwise, maybe you can explain it to me. A lot of native peoples place more value on a buffalo than they do a deer. However, none of our rock art feature buffalo, to my knowledge.
Yeah. Well, there is buffalo.
There are buffalo.
Yeah, there's buffalo, but it's the style of rock art is later than the 2,000-year-old stuff that's out in the Lord, because
So this
the more recent rock art, last few hundred years will have buffalo.
Okay, so why was deer more important?
Because it was part of a cult. The deer itself, besides the fact that it was it provided for your family if you hunted it well, it also became a part of a spiritual connection to the deer. And maybe cult is a strong word, but to make my point, it was hunting and gathering was even a religious way of life.
Okay, so instead of saying cult, we can say theology.
I don't know, theology, but theology concerns itself with one God.
Okay.
Okay, in this case there were multiple gods. There's 5. At least that's the way I understand it. But so their life was a religious experience revolving around the hunt of the deer, and that's why it's mentioned more so in the 2,000-year-old rock art than it does buffalo. There's something about the deer that our ancestors were able to relate to in a spiritual way that they didn't with buffalo. But I'm not saying other northern tribes didn't do that. You know, I'm sure like Lakota people and all them, that's their buffalo hunt and their harvesting is ritualized. And ours was too, but it revolved around the deer. It was a preference. You know, our ancestors lived the way they lived because it was a great way to live. It was a great way to hunt and gather and provide for your family.
Well, I think I could argue that buffalo back then were migratory. You know, so they weren't around year round.
Check.
Deer are not. They tend to stick to certain areas. What I'm also curious about is that pre-white settlement, Texas had a local population of elk. I mean, are there any elk in the rock art?
You know, that's a good question. If there was elk in this region, and if it made it into the rock art, it would have made it as an elder brother of the deer.
Of the deer. Okay, so for those of y'all who can see it, and I'll post a picture of it here in a second. There's an anthropomorph that the sun turns into, or is characterized, that shoots down the deer. The anthropomorph in this picture has long antlers, tall antlers, not very short and stocky like a whitetail, but more elongated like an elk. How do we know it's not an elk?
We don't. Some of the things that we know about the painting was that our ancestors did take a little artistic license,
of course,
with what they're doing,
I mean, that's not to say that a white-tailed deer can't get that big. It's, you know, before hunting became a trophy sport, you know, some deer could possibly live a little bit longer. And those of y'all who hunt whitetail know that the horns of the rack of a deer can get pretty significant, very impressive.
Yeah.
So maybe the artists wanted the anthropomorph to have a very impressive rack.
Perhaps.
For lack of a better term.
Yeah. So, I'll share a little something with our work.
Okay.
We learned that those characters in the rock art, the way that they're designed, was outstretched arms, elongated bodies, short legs. Even the antlers.
Okay.
Even the antlers. All that design came from the way that the caverns of Sonora is laid out underneath the ground. If you look at the diagram of the caverns of Sonora, and then you look at it and then snap a picture of it, turn it right side up, you'll see the outstretched arms, elongated body, short legs, even a head at the top of the shoulders above the arms and antlers.
Oh, okay.
Coming off of its head.
Is there a picture of that?
Yeah, you can look it up.
Okay, so I'll post that picture right here. Okay, so the black brush is blooming. So instead of being more atomically correct, they took a license and wanted the human what's the word? Human characters in the painting to look to be more like more cave-like, or
anthropomorphize. It's a part human and part animal. Those are all anywhere you can. There's a difference between one character and the next. It seems is that we human beings and plants and animals and everything, we go through these processes of change through the seasons and throughout the years, right? And the painting is designed to show you that life is constantly in flux. It's always changing. It's always metamorphosizing into something else. Just like even human character is that way. You're not the same person you were 10 years ago, and you won't be the same person 10 years from now that you are today. And so life is constantly changing, and there is no norm. There is no norm in a human's life. You're always responding to outside stimulation, and people come and go in your life, and it changes you, and you morph into somebody or some, and then depending on your experience, it depends on the kind of older person you're going to become.
Right. So how come, or why is it that this painting was never duplicated? I mean, by our people. Why is it in this one spot. It was only recorded one time.
Well, there are parts of it were recorded in other places, but this would have been a dissertation. This would have been the magnum opus. This would have been, this is it. This is truth. It's math for sure. We have to paint it like this because what we just did by painting this on the wall is going to guarantee the future of our people for the next 2,000 years. Remember, they're hunters and gatherers. They plan ahead. Well,
Sure.
The planning ahead 2,000 years is a pretty bright idea as far as I'm concerned, because those of us today who understand it and can read it are the beneficiaries of that work, especially those of us who are indigenous to Texas and northeastern New Mexico. It benefits our lives and enriches our lives by learning how they learned and knowing what they knew. Because sometimes you can take something in the sky and go up to the painting and put your finger on it and say, this moment right here, right now, is happening right now in front of me. It's just out of this world, the way they understood, planetary movements and meteor showers and so forth and so on. And it's really neat, if you can do this. And there was some evidence left behind, even during the time of colonialism in San Antonio. For example, they carved things onto Mission Concepcion in San Antonio that you can still reference in the sky ever so often. So, really shows their brilliance, and that's one of the things I'm excited about with working with NASA, is that our ancestors get the recognition that they deserve. That they understood themselves to be masters of the universe, and when the Spanish came to Texas, that was pretty much erased. Anything that we had gained over the last 4,000 years of knowledge was pretty much done away with, so that colonialism could take place. And so, but now that we've got, I'd say, 90% of it back, the knowledge back, and we'll always be at 90%, right? Because we didn't paint it. Now that we've got that much back, we can now turn it into storytelling, books, children's books, math, mathematics. I have a few questions for NASA. There's some inconsistencies in their work, in their models that they use, that I see using our ancestral math. But it's nothing. It's nothing compared to the majesty that is NASA and how they were able to put a man on the moon and bring him back home safely. All of that is pretty cool. It's pretty cool. It's great. And every now and then there's a faux pas, and it happens. It happens. I'm sure Einstein had his moments. But one of the interesting ways we learned about that, where even NASA, as fantastic as they are, can miss something by a day, is because I use Starry Night's program, and then at SAC there's another program, a computer program called Digistar, and it takes about 2 or 3 computers to create all the math that involved in thousands of years of astronomy. And so one year I compared my notes with what I learned from Starry Nights with Digistar, and I learned that the 2 programs were a year off. So Starry Nights will say we'll have a planetary conjunction here, but Digistar won't show it until exactly 365 days later.
Okay.
You get me? So, what's the difference? I'd like to understand why Digistar and Starry Nights don't jive. There's a year there they're not connecting. All you have to do is make the adjustment, though. So whatever you're looking for in Starry Nights, just go to Digistar, look for it. You'll be off by a year. So just add the year, and there it is. Even 4,000 years ago, it would have been a span.
Right.
Yeah.
So, as Kowi-Tekan people, why do we put so much cultural significance on this particular painting and not other paintings? Because we as people ranged all over South Texas, northeastern Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
There's other culverts, there's other rivers, there's other rock shelters, and I'm sure dozens of them, not hundreds of them, have similar have other paintings, have other stories.
Yeah.
Why is it this one and not that one?
First of all, the simplest answer is because it guarantees success. When you put the time into this rock art, this mural that we call Napaco now, it guarantees success, like it has for our research. Secondly, there are two types of rock art out there, that some much older than the White Shaman mural, that has to do with panthers. Or panther. So there were societies there that were more animal, like anthropomorphized, peoples, I guess. But the emphasis is on the panther, the jaguar, and it's older than the deer. And so, from what I understand, what I learned from my Huichol brothers and sisters, is that at one time they themselves were more animalistic. They themselves were more ferocious in the way that they behaved.
They were more primal.
Sure. And then what one of my Huichol brothers tells me is that one day we decided to break away. Huichol decided to break away from being more animalistic and primal by converting the kind of medicines that they were eating. They went from eating datura and to eating peyote, and peyote helped them to become more human. They became more human. He tells me this is how we became more human than we were then, and that is why we eat this peyote now, to make us human, to continue the evolution of being human, lest we get away from that again and become like animals.
Yeah, eventually I want to come back to that, because that creates some very interesting questions, very interesting topics. Because you see that in a lot of other cultures around the world, that before we were human, we were more like the animals, and then this happens, or the gods taught us this, or the gods taught us that. Prometheus gives us fire, and we become more human. There's all these things referenced in other cultures that explain that humans were more animal-like, and then we were given a gift, and we became more human.
Well, peyote is the center of all that.
That is interesting. Are y'all taking notes? That is really something. Okay. So where does all these other anthropomorphs fit in? I mean, we have a werewolf, for God's sake. Are those pictographs older or newer, or somebody just telling the story?
The deer is the most recent style, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 years. And before that, it's everything else. But I don't know enough about. I haven't seen enough of the rock art to tell you what that is,
okay,
or what it represents. Unfortunately, this particular style of rock art, Lower Pecos, has gotten my attention to the extent to where I'm not interested or even have the time to look at anything else.
It is quite a thing. It's kind of like stumbling across the Library of Alexandria and not knowing where to begin. You pick one subject and you kind of stick with it.
Yeah.
There's just too much information to go through.
Yeah, way too much. Just sit down and hold on.
Pick a specialty.
well, you don't know where the specialty is. You know, every animal's going to tell you something different, maybe from a different perspective.
Now, would you say that the reason why that is because we were a collection of bands and not entirely one people? Like everybody had their own twist, their own interpretation, their own.
Like today.
Yeah, like today. I mean, exactly like today.
Everybody wants to be a chief.
You know, like even today in San Antonio, we have, you know, for lack of a better explanation, we have two factions of Coitecos. You know, maybe even three. I don't know. You know, we have Coitecos on this side of the border. We have Coitecos on that side of the border. I don't know if those Coitecos on the other side of the border can tell a similar story, or if their stories are anything different, or if they're indigenously connected to the roots at all. You know, so I suppose we could argue that any go back 2,000 years and any collection of people can tell you a different story.
Perhaps, but the one thing there is a safety. There's a safety in the work that we're doing. There's something that guarantees that those of us that are doing this kind of work cannot monopolize space and time. A lot of what we're learning from the rock art, the Greeks knew 2,000 years ago. So there were cultures all over the world looking at the same skies in a 24-hour period and coming up with similar ideas, you know, and so they were looking at the same things, had similar thoughts and similar ideas, and that's starting to show glaringly that, you know, when I see something in the rock art and I go to my computer program and I'm looking at the skies 2,000 years ago, blah blah blah, I can take that moment and then look at what the Greeks were doing, and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So the world is too big for even one study like ours to monopolize anything. You don't want to do that. You don't want to tell people that I know more than you do, or my version of, or my interpretation of the painting is valid because I said so. You can't do that because the universe is too big and the math is too good. You can't change math. You can't change Venus's, you know, behavior. You can't change the moon's behavior. You can't do any of that. You can't alter the landscape enough to change it and then say, well, this is the way that I see it, and too bad. You can't do that.
So at this point, all the information that we've collected, the stories that have reemerged, or however you want to put it, this is all just best guess, best educational guess. This is our theory. This is what we believe. This is how we interpret it. Although somebody could just,
well, except for the math.
Well, except for the math.
Except for the math, everything else can be left up to interpretation.
Okay.
But you can't alter the math. It's too consistent. It does its job too well to predict things 2,000, 4,000 years out. That's what I want to focus hardest in my relationship with NASA. Is that our ancestors, when they painted this painting 2,000 years ago on the wall, they had already looked at their future and decided that it would come true, and it gave them a tremendous sense of hope. So much hope, that when the Spanish arrived, it didn't squelch the hope. The hope continued on through the efforts of creating the missions along the river in the fashion that they did, and that hope continues today. And now we're going to put that hope on paper. We're going to publish it. Some of it we'll keep to ourselves, and some of it we'll share with the public.
So let's the eclipse is going to happen here soon, and in the next couple of days, which, by the way, is my daughter's birthday, April 8th. So this eclipse is going right over Texas. Right over Texas. And we know that eclipses don't happen all that often. Even when they do, the ecliptic of the eclipse changes across North America. So are we able to go back and see when the last time an eclipse came right on top of Texas?
Just like this one?
Just like this one.
4,055 years ago.
4,055 years ago. Is that in any way significant? Is it a landmark? Is it a sticky note? You know
what? That's funny. It's a sticky note. The big one was last year.
The big one was last year.
Yeah.
So
that was the main.
If y'all remember, it is unusual for us to have eclipses this close together. Most of the time, an eclipse happens once every 4 years or so. We had 2 eclipses back to back. This one is coming across northeast to southwest, but the last one went northwest to south.
No, it's southwest to northeast. It's moving across Texas from south to north.
Well, direction. Last year's went the other direction.
Right.
So so what's the sticky note about this one?
Well, first of all, it's a total eclipse, and a lot of cultures around, at least in the Americas, say that the sun dies and is reborn again. And so, well, from what we understand, that's the matter of the sun and its death and rebirth. That's the sun's business. Like, it's going to go away privately and die and come back again. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And most people, and let me follow up by saying that's really not our concern. But there are some folks, native peoples in America, that go in the house.
That's true.
And
that is true.
Stay there. They don't come outside because they don't want whatever mojo is taking place to attach themselves to the individual as the eclipse is happening. So it did make it. The math predicts it that it did make it into the rock card, but only as a number. It didn't emphasize the annular eclipse last year was something that our ancestors personalized more than the total eclipse coming this year.
Why is that?
Because there's an interesting, ahead of every annular eclipse, well, maybe not every annular eclipse, most annular eclipses, there's a story taking place in the sky. And what's happening is, over a 2-year period.
So, real quick, by story you mean a celestial progression?
I guess.
Okay.
So what happens is, I'll use last year's eclipse, is that, see, there was also one in 1940. Anyway, before the eclipse appears over the state of Texas, or anywhere around the world for that matter, this is very common. Mars and Venus play this little cat and mouse game in the sky over a period of 2 years.
That's funny. If any of y'all understand Greek mythology, Mars is the god of war and Venus is the goddess of beauty. And they had a thing in Greek mythology, so cat and mouse game is kind of funny.
Yeah. So there's this cat and mouse thing that they do together for a 2-year period, and then lo and behold, there's an annular eclipse. Okay. And but for our ancestors, that was the hunt. Mars is the hunter, and Venus is the prey. And when Mars finally catches up with Venus and traps Venus, the annular eclipse will take place.
Okay.
And so the annular eclipse is a symbol that Venus has been caught, and then there's a story that begins, at least in the rock art, in the mural. It's the beginning of the story throughout the entire length of the painting for the next few thousand years. So we're lucky to be alive at the very beginning of the story where the sun rode the deer through the underworld. Well, this last year's eclipse was that beginning. And what precipitated that eclipse was the hunt with Mars chasing Venus through the skies within a 2-year period.
So we can't say for sure whether or not this eclipse would have confused them. Because if it really did play that kind of cultural significance, that we would watch Mars hunt Venus in the sky, and then the eclipse would happen, and we're like, okay, that's it. This isn't going to happen again for so long. Oh shit, there's another eclipse. Well, what happened to Mars and Venus? What happened? Did she escape or what?
Well, the painting doesn't say. It doesn't say.
If it does, we haven't found it yet.
That's correct. If it does, we haven't found it yet.
Fair enough. So you remember in Apocalypto, Mel Gibson's interpretation of a Mayan event. They're sacrificing on the top of the pyramid, and all of a sudden they get freaked out when there's an eclipse going on. Do you think that he didn't give them enough credit that they would have known the eclipse was going to happen that day?
Yeah, it seems as though they wouldn't have known, but there are accounts where the Spanish did come and hold some people's hostage and say, if you don't do what we tell you, we're going to take away the sun. And the people reacted to it, and the sun did disappear, and then it came back again, and the Spanish won their threat. They were threatening you with this, and if you don't do what we say, well, they did what they said because they saw it happen. So some peoples in the Americas understood astronomy to the degree that our ancestors did. Some of them didn't. That movie and that part of the movie you're talking about proposes that they didn't.
That perhaps they didn't.
They didn't. But I don't believe that. And here's the other thing about that. Our ancestors in the Americas knew astronomy as well as anyone else in Europe. Okay? And Europe knew what we knew, and we knew what they knew. And they came to the Americas during these very astronomically interesting times, full well knowing what we were about to do next, because they understood the skies as well as we did, and they took advantage of it. They took advantage of knowing ahead of time what we were going to do. And as a matter of fact, the peoples in Mexico, Central and South America were already in the beginnings of a migration back north, back in this direction, following a star in the sky called Achenar. And that star, as it migrated northward due to the precession of the equinox, as it migrated northward from its view in Mexico all the way to its view in North Texas, that's when the Spanish and the Tlaxcalans and that migration was coming in our direction. And when the missions were finally established, all 5 missions were finally established, that star could be seen in the gun sights in San Angelo between the buttes, matching the buttes of her gun sight. Yeah. That bead at the end of your rifle, you can see that star between those 2 buttes. Right. So it's our understanding that there was already a migration heading north in this direction, and the Spanish just hitched a ride and took advantage of the people.
I can't remember the name of the movie, but Whoopi Goldberg was in a movie where somehow, some way, she gets thrown back into medieval times, and she tries to convince everybody that she's a wizard or a warlock or something, and she notes the dates in her head that today is such and such date, and she happens to remember that there's an eclipse this day. So she's threatening all the townspeople and the nobles, that I'm such a great wizard, I can take the sun away. And Whoopi Goldberg, goes like this, and sure enough, the eclipse happens, and everybody's all freaking out, and she's like, I am all powerful, you can't, blah, 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 blah. She goes, okay, son, you can go ahead and come back now, and then the sun peeks out from behind the moon, and it's really cool that it just reminded me of that movie.
That's a good Whoopi Goldberg. I think she's good at doing shit like that.
Right. Okay, so this eclipse, although pretty cool, is just a footnote. It's like, by the way, this happens.
Well, Yeah, I think that there may have been some sort of plan for it back then, 4,055 years ago. But I'll tell you what, this work that we do, and as much as we travel to be together, ourselves and our people in what we land here, as much as we work to be together, we just about used up all of our resources that we had for last year's eclipse in October. That was just a few months ago. And so we're barely getting back into our financial groove, and we've got other things we need to tend to. And we just making a note of it, you know, and we're giving ourselves a break, and just let the sun and the moon do its thing. The sun is, according to other peoples, the sun will die and be reborn again, which is a new beginning, just like the last annual eclipse was the beginning of the story. And so we're just going to let it be and just not worry about it. I plan to be somewhere north of San Antonio to see it, but we're not that concerned about it.
Yeah. So this road we're taking right now takes us around Batesville instead of going through it. Okay, so you say that last year was the beginning of the story. What's the story that's starting? What can we expect to happen next? What are we looking forward to? You know, either culturally or just you know, a fun story to tell around a school. Okay, 3 months. You know, what are we doing?
Well, that all depends on what you're drinking.
Of course. Okay. Well, it depends on who's there.
Right.
But
that's a good one.
You know, well, what happens next? You know.
Well, what happens next is that
when can I go grocery shopping?
The next supermoon.
The next supermoon.
Mm-hmm.
As in blue moon?
No, supermoon. That's when the moon is closest to the Earth.
Man, that happens like once every whenever.
Mm-hmm. And then, you know.
And it only happened to you recently.
We had one that happened recently, but the next supermoon is the next thing that's gonna come up. But it's representative of the story about how our creation began, the creation of the universe. A lot of things had to happen before the first day, before the first sunrise, and the creation of the universe, and us as intelligent beings. There are a lot of supermoons for the next few thousand years that have to take place before that supermoon is the supermoon, right? And all the other supermoons between now and then are subservient to that one. And then there's meteor showers. It's next meteor shower in August, the Perseids. Sometimes it's intense, sometimes it's not. But it's an accumulation of all of those events are cumulative, and then they eventually tell the bigger, broader story about how the universe was created.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
just like every day, every day is a day in a part of 2024. Then 2025 comes back again, and so those days return, and we celebrate birthdays, and we celebrate Easter, and we celebrate Fiesta, and we celebrate it's accumulative, okay? And then at the end of the century, we'll look back and see, okay, well, you know, what happened? What's likely to happen in the next 100 years? You know, right now, the big concern is climate change. So I hope that 100 years from now, you know, the state of Texas hasn't burned up from droughts and wind and crazy weather, you know. The future is, you can just about guarantee what's going to happen next astronomically and mathematically, but as far as the Earth is concerned and the condition that she's in is unpredictable. And by the way, anything unpredictable like the arrival of the Spanish in Texas was enough to shake people up that believed that their future was guaranteed up until that point. And then when the Spanish arrived, it threw everything into chaos.
Well, that brings up a question. Some celestial events are not as predictable. That they happen so rarely that it's very difficult for a pattern to emerge, especially when the event happens only once a generation, or even longer. For example, Neil deGrasse Tyson is talking about a meteor, or maybe it's a comet, I can't remember, that's going to be coming in 2029. Apophis. Okay. That Apophis is going to come within 18,000 miles of Earth. And that's not something that happens yearly.
Right.
So let's say that an event similar to that happens. Something that's not in the rock art, something that can't be predicted or calculated or anticipated. How did our ancestors handle that?
They
look up and what the fuck is that? That is not supposed to be there.
Right.
You know?
One of those things was the Crab Nebula of 1054.
Yeah?
Yeah. It affected tribes in America, and I can't tell you who, and I can't tell you how, but they did alter their behaviors and pay homage to that what happened. But that what they do was usurped by America. It was Americanized, and we call that the 4th of July. The Crab Nebula took place in 1054 on the 4th of July, and it lit up the skies day and night for like 2 weeks. You could see the sun. You could see the nebula, the explosion in the skies.
That's insane.
The other thing that happened even more recently, that was even earlier than that, was a major drought in the state of Texas in the mid in 536 or so, and a few years after that, there was a major drought in the state of Texas that changed a lot of things here in the Americas, and for a time. There was, because the drought was so bad, there was a massive exodus out of Texas, and people didn't reconnect anymore with this region for another 500 to 1,000 years.
You know, I enjoy a lot of hunting, and one of my favorite hunters is a guy named Stephen Ranella. He had a show called Meat Eater, where he travels the United States and hunting public lands. Anyway, he was doing a javelina hunt in Big Bend National Park, where he happened to find a rock shelter. Obviously, other people have found it too. There's ash on the walls from previous fires that other hunters or hikers have used, and there's even some rock art in there. And he's sitting there in his shelter, and he's eating a quail, I think. He had shot during the day, and he's talking about the exodus that my dad is mentioning, that at one point in South Texas history, all human beings disappeared for a few generations, and that nobody could fully explain why. I thought it was really interesting that this guy from up north happened to know this about our state, about our history.
Yeah, well, it happened all over the world. That's how we know it happened. It was Krakatoa. The volcano blew its top and sent the world into chaos. The Chinese made a record of it. Teotihuacan fell that year. Going on about that time. All over the world.
So Krakatoa blew its top, and the Earth's axis moved.
No, it didn't move. It just the dust filled the went all over the world. The dust covered the Earth. It trapped the heat. It created droughts, and people died. This is during the plague, European plague, the bubonic plague. There's ice cores that show the.
Yes, exactly.
Ice cores.
There's ice cores that show it. Yeah. There's another movie about that. It's really cool.
And then there are the tree rings. There are tree rings that show it also.
And then the added evidence that there was no archaeological evidence in certain regions.
Right. If you're interested in seeing what that was, there's on YouTube you can find it. 536, the year the sun disappeared.
Jeez, man. Likewise, on Amazon Prime, the guy that did the recent Jurassic Park movies, he does a movie about people coming from the future to bring people from the past forward to fight an alien race. Turns out these aliens were buried in the ice in Russia and were released due to global warming. But for some reason, these aliens had ash and soot from a volcano only found in China. I think it was a similar eruption event. They explained the whole thing. It was really cool. You have to watch it, but anyway. So okay, well that's okay. So that's just a little bit of what my dad is currently working on. Some things that the painting explains a little bit about. You know, just one more chapter in the Goethecan culture, or maybe you can even say mythology. I don't even know what you want to call it for sure. But you know, we wanted to talk about this just that much. Since you know since the eclipse is coming out pretty soon, I thought it'd be cool to talk about what's going on with Dad and NASA, and how some of these things relate to our rock art. So if you have any questions or any ideas for Dad, please let me know down in the comments. We hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.